So last year, I had this silly idea that I was going to come up and, hey, I'm going to use Evernote as my threat intel tracking system. And it was kind of funny, but I think the point of the presentation there was to basically develop a structure or a process. And then based on that, come up with something that you could implement in open source tools. That's something that I really touched on at the end of the talk this year. And so what I hope to do this year is kind of give you a little bit of background for those that weren't here last year. Second is to talk about how, trying to use Evernote as this like really complex analytics system, although it may be cheap, like obviously won't work. And then what I learned from that in terms of building your own internal threat tracking systems. So is anybody familiar with the Hello Adele song from like about 8 months ago or something like that? I love that, yeah. Well, my kids really liked it. But then about a month later, they came out with this like Hello from the Dark Side song, and it was a whole parody. And man, I just heard that thing like again and again and again throughout the house. And at the time, I was trying to come up with ideas for names for this talk. So I kind of followed that and called it, just Hello to the Dark Side. So, but I don't know, that was about 6 months ago. The Hello song has run its course. The parody of it, of Hello from the Dark Side, is kind of, no one even hears of that anymore. And now it's, October, and I'm thinking like, no one's gonna get this now. So lessons learned is don't make your title based on some like hit popular thing that's gonna shoot up like some meme, and then you're never gonna hear of it again. So this is just a standard disclaimer slide. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is me talking. I'm not representing anybody. Quick background about me. So I have a little over 20 years in information security. Most of that has been, or I'd say all of it has been spent on the defensive side. So I did do a little bit of offensive stuff up front with doing, when I first started doing web app sec and doing a little bit of pen testing. But the money just seemed to be more on the defensive side, and so I had a family to support, and so that's where I went. I've spent most of my time in the government sector within the US. The past 5 years, I've been working in more of an operational environment, and a lot of that time has been spent teaching. So trying to teach new folks that want to become analysts how to do that well, and then also some of the threat intel tactics too. All right, so that's my plug of my website and consulting. All right, background. So, so a long time ago, in a SOC far, far away, I was working as an analyst, and this is a kind of a quick summary of what I talked about last year. But I wanted to track all these cool things of, there was all this open source intel that was out there, and I was trying to pull that into some place so that I can pivot off of what I was seeing into what's going on in with all the open source data out there. And because I was in a big bureaucratic organization, I really didn't, it was really hard for me. Hey, can I set up a server here and put a database or some sort of web app on it? And they're like, no, that would be like a 2-year project. And so I'm like, all right. So, trying to keep things as separate as possible, what I wanted to do was build this open source place externally that I could capture all this stuff so that I could go to one place and search it. So that if I discover something on the inside, I could pivot out into all this information that I collected. And so that's how I came with the idea of doing this whole Evernote thing. That seemed like the coolest platform. Love Evernote. Hopefully they will survive. Else I'm gonna have to go to OneNote, which I don't like as much. But it does have its cool capabilities too. So that's how this whole thing got started. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Evernote, and I basically took that passion that I had for just that platform, turned it in with there's a lot of advanced techniques that you can do with it, with hierarchical tagging, save searches, you have different notebooks, and essentially you can use a note as sort of like a database row. And then from that, like a notebook's a table, et cetera. So I thought, hey, this is just like a database, and if I put if I set my structure up right, I can find stuff really easily. So I was in, and I guess kind of still am into the whole GTD thing, so that's that to-do methodology that folks in IT tend to migrate to. And then I discovered the secret weapon, which was this philosophy of how to implement GTD within Evernote. And like I said, I learned a lot there, and that planted the seed of using Evernote as this threat intelligence platform. Now, it wasn't for something like an organization, and this is like years back, so we didn't have like commercial platforms and stuff like that you could use. So that's a little bit of background there. And then just, I know there's a lot of, one thing that I want to do up front is define, what is threat intel. So this is just a Sun Tzu quote, but his standard thing, what's in infosec defensive presentation without a quote like this, right? So, and the key here is to know your enemy. So you're really going to go out and try to learn as much about the enemy as possible. And based on that, you can better defend yourself. Or if you're on the offensive side, you can see the gaps and attack those gaps. Now, I was trying to look for an official definition, and so I found this one from Gardner. And I'm not even going to read it. I think I may have read it last year, but I read this thing and it just makes no sense to me. And then for $200 more, you can get the 4-page document that says this too. So, but I don't know. I mean, I read this and I just feel like I'm reading another language. So I came up with a definition here that I thought was very compact. And, really gives, it expresses a lot of information of what threat intelligence is. So it's about actionable information you create to detect and stop the bad guys. And each one of those words, like actionable, if you get a piece of intel or even a piece of data, if you can't do anything with it, it's useless. Information, and I specifically am defining that as, not data. A lot of the threat intelligence providers out there, they're selling you data. So you have things like hashes, IPs, domains. But what you really want is information, or what I'm really talking about is the context around that data. So you need a little bit more information. The third underlined quote there is "you create." I just think I don't think you can I don't think you can externally get threat intelligence. Now maybe there are some places through information sharing communities within the same sector that your business is in. But I think the best intelligence that you're going to get is the stuff that you create. And that's the one principle there is your network and all the hosts and machines that are on that network, which no one else understands that. So, the best place to do it is in-house. And I know I was here last year and Dave Kennedy talked about this and Chris Nickerson talked about this too, where if you're going to do threat intelligence, you have to do it inside. And then there's the to detect. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of times, you want to, just in a traditional fashion, you want to detect possible attacks. But you may not have assurance that the signatures that you create are really going to detect those attacks. So what you're doing is you're going to detect that, and essentially you're going to let maybe learn more about the adversary that way, so that you can generate more mature signatures. And then based on that, the next step is to stop them. So once you have these known really good signatures that aren't going to produce a lot of false positives and have people within your organization complaining to you, you can put these things in prevention mode. And the nice thing about that is now you can, ideally filter out all this noise and focus on the unknown. So kind of trying to break this down and looking at it another way, is everybody familiar with this diagram here? So this is David Bianco's pyramid of pain, and he came out with this. I think it's probably like 4 or 5 years old now, but I think it really gives the essence of what threat intelligence is and the whole continuum for it, just from the easy stuff to the really hard stuff. And so on the bottom, you have the things that, like the threat data that you probably get from the feeds, things like hash values, IP addresses, domain names, even a little bit of like network and host artifacts. But whenever you get up to the top, what are the tools that people are consistently using? And then lastly, what are the TTPs? So those are the tactics, techniques, and procedure. And it's just sort of building like a profile of what that adversary is. And so usually there's this process where, I'm sort of categorizing the bottom 4 layers as, and maybe up into the 5th layer there as sort of threat data. And the top part is probably pure intel. And then just a little diagram. So I'm going to take all this data, go through some intel process. This is one that I just grabbed from the DoD in the US, just because that's where I do most of my work. And going through this very complex evaluation process, and from that, creating the intel that you can use to stop the bad guys. And then the other thing is, why do we want to create this internally? And I already touched on this, but if you buy it externally, there's basically buying threat intel externally is sort of like just putting in an IDS system and not tuning it. You just get tons of false positives, right? And so with, like an external threat feed, you're just going to get tons of false positives. You're going to send the little analysts that you do have down all these rabbit holes and essentially maybe get distracted from, stopping what the real threats are. So like with an IDS, if you get an external feed, like you really have to understand, what the good feeds are, what the bad feeds are. Some feeds may be good at giving you domain stuff. Other feeds may be good at giving you IPs. And maybe there's like information sharing orgs that are giving you more of that higher level data too. So you really have to turn off your screen. And then this is just a graph that I built, and I used to be very hard on the vendors here, but I've gotten a little nicer. That green square, right, or this green circle here, like it used to be just touching on the edge there, but I could just kind of moved it over some because, I have a lot of friends that work at vendors and doing TI stuff, so I wanted to give them a break. But, so you basically have this universe of known threat or external threat data, and whenever you're buying it, there's just a small portion, like you're buying all this, but there's a small portion of it that's actually really useful to your organization. Like ideally, you want something like this, and once again, this gets back to the one point that I've been making, which is, anybody? Audience participation. What? Okay. Oh my God. I'm gonna. Somebody I used to work with is gonna. No, he's a cool guy. But so really, what the focus is you want to try to do stuff internally because that's going to be the most relevant information for you. And so that's a picture on the right. And so Essentially, that's the takeaway. The other thing that I think why doing threat intelligence internally is important is because it's exciting, you know? Like if you're an analyst just working in a SOC and alert pops and you go through some like robotic procedure to see if it's a false positive and whatever. And I know a lot of guys that do that and they just hate their jobs and it's boring. I mean, wouldn't that be cool if maybe like 25% of your job could be, hey, take a step back, look across all the cases, try to pivot out to some of the open source or purchased intel that we have, and look for trends and that, you know, signatures aren't gonna find. So there's a lot of different options there. I mean, it could be like I don't know, what is Google has, I don't know if they still have it, but what you get like 1 day per week that you can do what you want. So maybe you get like 1 day per week where you would get to do TI. And the big thing here is that if you can, if anybody is a manager here, you know, the big thing within infosec is turnover, you know, people leaving. So if you can keep people happy, they'll stay longer. And the nice thing there is that you retain institutional knowledge. So instead of there being like this constant flip over and loss of that institutional knowledge, people stay longer, so that you can better defend your network. Okay, so that's just a little bit of the background. So what I wanted to do now is jump into the environment, just so that we have a good baseline. So the environment, I Googled to define, you know, to come up with like some really awesome sounding term or definition of what a threat intelligence platform is. And so here we have Anton Chewbacca, kind of like Chewbacca, huh? Kind of the theme of the talk, huh? All right, so he said that we're gonna, you know, it's a system that can collect TI data, retain TI for analysis, and you can do all kind of analytics with it, normalize it, enrich it, all that kind of stuff, and be able to search and query it, and then be able to make something of that and push data out to other systems. Say like if there's an automated way, you could push it out, automatically push out things to sensors. And then the last one is Threat Connect. This is just, they were one of the first ones that I was researching that came out with a threat intelligence platform. I don't want to, like, I have no affiliation with them other than they give me a free account. But so they define it as a system that can do aggregation. So, I mean, in everything, this can be OS int, this could be commercial or shared data, and it has to be a system that can analyze all that data or allow the analysis of that. And then lastly, you have to act. So you have all this stuff and you're seeing patterns and trends, you know, and be able to do something with that. Now, I originally, and this is just a very short spot, this is kind of like what I came up with, the Evernote system, and won't go into details here, but I think on one of the later slides, or maybe I think I had it on the earlier slide, I have a link to this presentation that I did last year. So you can watch it, but the basic takeaway is that, you know, this, like, I love Evernote, it's a great system. You know, and obviously with a lot of data, there's going to be a scaling problem. So, you know, I got up to like about 80,000 notes, and I would just do anything, like open Evernote, and it would take like 10 minutes to open up. So I kind of just cut out a lot of data. I still think it could be useful. It depends how you're using this system. There are systems that you're going to shove a lot of data in, and you're going to, you know, ideally, you would push that to some like big data, Hadoop, you know, buzzword thingy, machine language, that's the new one. Or no, machine learning, sorry. So you're going to throw all this data into that, and it's going to do all this cool stuff. Well, obviously Evernote can't do that, but for doing some basic things, like I wouldn't be putting threat feeds into this. But if you want to do some basic things where you're doing some one-off stuff, I think it would work well. All right, so, but based on that, I learned a lot in going through that process. And, it was really trying to take a deep dive, because a lot of times we go out and we buy these threat intel platforms. And, and we just use it. And so, but what this allowed me to do is really go in and look at some of the tools out there, some of the knowledge that I've gained over the years. And then also to really dig down and understand what the data structures look like. And so, like, the big thing that I kind of, going back to the Star Wars theme here is, attacks are the path to threat intelligence, right? So attacks lead to campaigns, campaigns lead to adversaries, and adversaries lead to TTPs, which are that, that top scale. And so essentially this looked like this. So we would have some object or some bucket that would store all our stuff. The inputs to that would be indicators. You would have attacks, which would be investigations. Now those could be attacks that your sensors pop. They could also be attacks maybe that you're part of an information sharing community. So they could be, one of your partners could say, hey, we've been seeing these attacks. And so that could be an instigator for an investigation too. And essentially the attacks lead to the campaign. So looking at trends across all the different attacks, trying to see similarities, and basically figuring out what campaigns are. And then if you get enough of these campaigns together, you can identify the adversary here. And I'm not talking about saying like, it's like unit ABC of country XYZ. Like I don't care, and most of us probably don't care about, who. I mean, that's for like the police and governments and stuff, right? What I care about is how, and that comes down to the TTPs. Because whoever it is, if I can figure out kind of the trends of how they're doing things, then I can stop them. And that's all I really care about. And so the cool thing that this does is this gives you this interesting structure where you can pivot around. So you get some sort of an attack. The attack would probably generate indicators associated with it. But then from that, you can pivot off of and see, all right, well, from this type of attack, these are the campaigns that execute similar attacks. These are the adversaries that have instigated those campaigns. And so it basically allows you this four-way toggle here to just pivot between all this data pretty nicely. So after pulling all this data together, and I used to do database design like way back in the day, but just came up with a basic structure. So essentially we have our four database tables here. So the indicators, attacks, campaigns, and adversaries. And of course the primary identifier here is going to be the first column, which is the name of the table. But then also like associating like an attack ID with it. So that's to help separate all the different attacks that are out there. And the same thing, there's going to be a campaign ID, an adversary ID. And then the last one is just for the adversaries, where you can basically start out with an adversary, what their TTPs are. And so using this basic database structure, you can pivot amongst all this data fairly quickly. If you note, get it? see the note column? So that is kind of like, all right, hey, I just want to go and take notes. And like as an analyst, there's all these fancy things that you can do for it, but if I just have a free field text field that I can go in and write something about this, in most cases that's fine with me. And also there's the tagging structure. So that allows you to cross-tag things. Like maybe you can temporarily relay campaigns or adversaries or attacks in certain ways. It basically allows you to slice and dice the data in various different ways. But my advice there, based on the Evernote stuff, is try to keep it pretty simple. Essentially, this is what your database schema is going to look like. So whatever your favorite database is, you can come up with something like that. Now, I was playing around with doing this in NoSQL because it's something that I just wanted to check out. So, but yeah, there's a one. I was checking out. It's called like CouchDB. So you can like just spin this thing up, and it's very GUI driven, and you can just put the data into. So, and that's the other thing. So there's a lot of GUIs that like there will be all these tip platforms. And although they're nice, I don't know, to me the GUIs always sort of get in the way. Like if I can have access to the data and write a SQL query to find the exact stuff that I want, like to me, I'm just much more comfortable with that. But there are a lot of platforms that are out there. So I mentioned the CouchDB one. That's just sort of a fun thing to try out. It's pretty simple if you want to get into NoSQL. So a lot of vendors get bent out of shape because they think this is some like Gartner Magic Quadrant thing, and it's good to be up in the top right. So if you're from a vendor, just because you're not in the top right, this is not that, so don't worry about it. But kind of just looking at it, so from left to right, we have commercial stuff all the way to the free. And this is, I forget her name, but she spoke at one of the SANS conferences. But she said like the systems over here are free, but they're free as in puppies. And then from the bottom to the top, get it? Because a lot of care and feeding and stuff. So from the bottom to the top is, these are just general data collection systems that you could maybe modify in certain ways to do this sort of stuff. And at the top, you have, the platforms that are designed to be tips. So just a few notes. Some of these, like I think, will Threat Connect, and I think one of the other ones here, like if you want to try them out, you can sign up and get a free account. That data there, but so if you want to log into those systems and try it out, I mean the ones I've tried out, they're very cool and they can do a lot, but there are like you need to be a data scientist to really go in and understand all the different capabilities that the system can do. And the other thing too is you don't necessarily have access to the underlying data. Like if I understand what the underlying data is, I can go straight into the database and I know exactly how to query the stuff that I want. But depending on your organization, they may just want to buy a product that does something like that. There are some other products here like MISP, which is a malware threat sharing group. They sort of tacked on a threat intelligence component. There's Solera, which is used in the financial industry. Does anybody use RT for case tracking? So there's like RTIR, that's open source. And there's crits and Bantus. So there's a lot of free options that you can try. And even if you want to get down into the open source SIM that Alien Vault provides, there's a lot of good places to start out. There's the ThreatNote one, which is an open source project that I've been tracking. And like some of the different threat intel conferences and stuff that I go to, like there's a lot of analysts. This is just a very simple system, and a lot of analysts really like it. I've been trying to work with the guy that wrote it because I didn't like, or I didn't understand how he was structuring his backend database, and so I touch base with him every once in a while to see if, you know, like they're definitely interested in looking for a new data structure. So I touch base with him every once in a while to see. I mean, and it's open source, so it's sort of like, you know, it isn't something that they're gonna develop, like basically just do it in their spare time. But there's a lot of good platforms out there to start. And I was talking to some, I mean, you could do the same thing with like just a wiki, Evernote, SharePoint, if you really like it, OneNote. I mean, there's a lot of things, but basically just just use whatever platform you have and structure it in a way like I talked about on the previous slides. And, you know, you can, you know, basically start this using, you know, like an extra Linux box and some of the open source software or software that you already have. Oops. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about, so that's basically, like, there's this foundational step of establishing, you know, what threat intelligence is. And then the second part of that is you have to have a system that really can collect all that stuff in an analyzable way so that you can make sense of it. So kind of the final part, and this is what I wanted to talk about last year, but I didn't really have much time, was trying to go from, you know, nothing. If you're, like, the big advice here is if you aren't doing threat intelligence internally, you should be doing it. And so this is just some quick steps for how to get started. And actually going through actually how to do it, and I'm going to talk about chains and diamonds and circles and squares and all that kind of fun stuff. So the first thing here is to get the basics right. So don't instigate a threat intelligence program if you aren't doing just the basics right. You know, do the quick and dirty stuff. You know, make sure that users aren't running as admin. You know, implement complex passwords or two-factor authentication. Change default passwords, that's a big one. And all your standard, like, security caring and feeding, you know, patching, AV, all that kind of stuff. Now, you know, there's some great pen testers out there that can easily bypass this, but at least this, you know, raises the bar, makes it harder. I always hear that if you run EMET, that's the big thing that they have a hard time getting around. So the second thing that you want to do is identify the team. And I talked about this a little bit in the first section. Like, I don't know how you want to do this. If you want to say, all right, one day a week you get to do threat intelligence, or maybe it's, you know, 2 or 3 people's part-time job. Just, you know, you need somebody that's going to take a step back and look across everything that's happening and try to identify trends. And then kind of tips. So if you're just starting out with threat intelligence, there's a lot of good ways. You know, you're just sitting there like, well, how do I start, right? So there's a lot of threat intel reports. Like if you've ever heard of APT notes, he just collects tons of stuff there. And so you can go through those and start reading them and trying to understand the traditional cycle of an attack, and then also what they're after. And then look at those and try to figure out, you know, if that attack would have hit our organization, would we have caught it? You know, if we wouldn't have caught it, what could we change so that we could catch it? You know, and then basically use those results and kind of go through that analysis process. Because what you'll find out a lot is maybe you'll look at it and you'll say, well, we probably wouldn't have got that. Well, what simple thing could we do so that we would catch it? Maybe you don't have the data that you need. So maybe you could throw up like a little sensor that just, you know, collects flow data, or, you know, you could use a tool like Bro that could collect metadata. of all the different protocols going through. So, an easy way to do that is just, there's Security Onion. So that's a simple out-of-the-box system that you could just throw up, put in the corner, plug it into a tap, and you'll have a lot of great data there. And the other thing too, like a lot of people are just like, oh, well, we need this data. And so the first thing you do is you go out to the vendors and you're just like, hey, we need to buy this, right? But what you may not realize is you already have it, You just don't know, like there's a system there that you're not aware that has it. Maybe it's a system that's designed to do X, but it also does Y and Z pretty well. So be sure to look at what you already have before you go out and buy new stuff. And also training, so there's different training courses out there for it, but just trying to become a good analyst is generally the way to do it. I always mention SANS, although they're expensive, it's really good training, so. So the third step is to pick an analysis framework. Now, so, we have kill chains and diamonds, and we have, like, the one on the left is a, fraud kill chain, and this one on the bottom right is one that Gartner came up with. It tried to look at all these kill chains and say, oh, well, they're all lacking this, and so they came up with their own. And there's also the diamond model, if anybody's heard of that. But basically, what all these things are, you have an attack, and it gives you a structure to place the data that you get from that attack on. So, just looking at something simple like this one here, you can basically be like, all right, well, we got attacked. All right, well, did they do any recon on us? Did they do any weaponization? And I'm not going to go into detail what all those things are, but each one of these has a big long white paper with it that you can go and read. But basically, you break the attack down into different phases and pull out those characteristics from those attacks and put them in this, if you want to call it a data model. And here's some more kill chains and stuff like that. There's like the ICS kill chain. There's this, I think this one in the center is the Mandiant chain. So there's a lot there, right? But, and I'm not going to tell you what chain's right and what chain's wrong. But the point is, pick one, anyone, and just start using it. And if it works, good. It may not fit well, so maybe you modify it. You have to take what is out there and customize it so that it works for your organization. Maybe you'll come up with a whole new one, So, but essentially you pick an analysis framework. So I kind of, just in the examples that I'm going to be talking about, I kind of looked at these three and like, well, I kind of like, parts of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this. And then I just kind of came up with my own kill chain just as an example, right? Like I'm not using this, but all right, well, I like these steps. And then it seemed like in this particular chain here, there was a lack of tracking here. So it's like, oh, well, let me add some steps there. So position, like how are you going to laterally move throughout, or how does the attacker laterally move throughout the network? And then access, like, well, if the data, like if you don't have permission to get access, what techniques do they use to raise their privilege or get access to a secluded system so that they can access that data? All right, this is embarrassing. Anyway, all right, well, this is the same slide as before, so I'm not going to go over this. Basically, choose your tip, whatever it is. If it's like an open source thing or whatever, or if you come from an org and the big execs want to throw money at it, get something really cool. But I mean, like 9 times out of 10, what I really find is there's like the official system that everybody is supposed to use, and they're like, oh yeah, that's the official system. But we do all our real work on that Linux box in the corner there, Like that's where we do our real work. So keep that in mind. That's why it's good to just start off with a little Linux box in the corner and see how you like it. So, so this step here, you want to create the data, and this is the job of every analyst in your organization. You want to do your analysis a little bit differently. Instead of just, hey, yeah, this is an analysis, or this is an attack, if it was successful, if it was not, whatever. But whenever you're documenting what that attack is, whatever structure you previously chose, try to break it down in terms of that structure. So as an example, maybe there was an attack and it wasn't successful. So, and you could write up your IR and say that, right? But maybe in your system, you would have some, or in your little side Linux box system, you kind of break it down into like the different phases. All right, so for the recon, oh, they use this Viper user agent activity, right? And weaponization, oh, they did like a help Windows media file. So this was a file that they sent that if you would play it, it would run some exploit on the box, right? And so the delivery is, email from leia@rebals.com to obi1@jedi.com. Check out this hilarious vid of me. And then they stopped it. Obi-Wan went and he clicked on it and was like, yeah, I want to check out Leia, right? But his AV stopped it, or his hips stopped it, right? So, and then there's a certain exploit for that, right? So we're good to go. And now you could continue this further. Like ideally you would say, oh, don't got to worry about it, let's move on. But then maybe, and this could be the job of the analyst, him or herself, but it could also be the job of that person that's taking the 1 day a week to do the threat intel work, to look across everything. But try to work forward. Well, we stopped it at the exploit phase. But if it would have got through, what would it have installed? So you can take that apart, do malware reverse engineering, figure out if it would have worked, what rat or whatever would it have installed. And the same thing with C2. You may have like IPs or domains that are embedded in there. And then positioning and access, and then action on objectives is usually one thing, which is usually exfil, but it can also be causing integrity issues too. So there's a critical system that they use for targeting, right? But if they can break in and change the data associated with that targeting system, they can make them, instead of attacking, the Death Star, they'll attack like a rebel base by accident or something. But essentially, your analysts are collecting this data and putting it into your case management system or your threat intel system, whatever you want to call it. Personally, I would like all threat intel systems to have the case management built in. Optionally, if you have a separate one, as long as there's API so that you can pivot between the two, that works too. But you end up having all this data over time, and then you have that person that spends 1 day per week looking at all the threat intel and trying to make it better. And basically trying to fill these out as much as possible and look across everything and basically look for trends. What attacks are similar, essentially. So the result of that was that, so we have attacks 1, 5, and 9. So attack 1, they used, this is the, so it was like this Viper UA. This is the one that we talked about earlier. Like a little bit more analysis. It was, just some mini share exploit. Attack 5, this is kind of the same thing, but this is the rebelstube.com help. So they sent an email saying, hey, check out this vid of me. But it's on their rebel version of YouTube, right? And then the exploit associated with that, and then, but person that was chosen to do threat intel that day, you know, did a little bit of analysis of that and saw that that exploit was going to install this tar66.exe. And kind of did a little bit of analysis on that. It was obfuscated pretty good, but they did get a C2 IP of 1.2.3.4. And then there's this attack 9 that also uses tar66.exe. They installed that. And then they investigated it further, and it seemed like somebody else looked at it. Maybe they had a little bit more reverse engineering experience. And they found that there was a particular document that they were looking for, which is this livingjedi.xls. And they were going to send it to that 1.2.3.7. So you basically try to look at the trends across this, and you can see, all right, well, in the weaponization and the delivery phase, you know, they're always doing something with videos, and they're using this Leia at rebels.com. So they did some domain squatting there, right? You know, it was instead of rebels, they did rebels, right? So we see some similarities there. And then we see some similarities here where they're both using this tar66.exe as the install. And they're always going to this, and you'd see it on the previous one too, they're always going to this 1.2.3. something. And it's always over port 443. So those are two things that we can look at. And so we can try to pull this together, and we can say, well, all these things are related, and we're going to call this campaign Finish Order 66. And so if you look at the center one, you know, through additional research, and like they went out and checked out some open source systems and did additional research. And in the center column here, they were able to kind of just pull all those things together, and for this particular campaign, come up with these particular indicators for the type of activity that they're doing. But the whole point of this whole thing is trying to get this Jedi, this list of living Jedis out, so that the dark side could kill them all. Now, there were also some other campaigns that were recognized throughout this process. You know, we have this, there was a campaign called Senate Fall. So once again, they used this Viper user agent thing. They did a delivery. It was from the Jar Jar, right? We all hate that. They did some typo or domain name squatting. Same C2, you know, 1.2.3. something. And there's this blue shadow thing that we filled out. So is anybody familiar with Blue Shadow? All right, well, it's a Star Wars thing, so. Y'all need to get on Wikipedia, man. Now, so this is some cool virus that they talked about in one of the shows. But in our parlance, this is like a password brute forcer, or you know, just something that's going to go out there and guess passwords. So that's how they're using to get around and move laterally. And access, we don't really know yet. And then in this particular campaign, it was something like anti-trade.doc, and they were pulling it out to the 1.2.3.3. And this is the one we already talked about. And then this one, a lot of the same thing here, Luke Transform. So we're talking, so there's some recon, there's a movie, Top 10 Jedi Tricks, 7 Habits of Effective Jedi.wmv. And it's from yoda.rebels.com. So what do you think that is? Maybe no one? What? Yeah, so maybe, you know, this is like, hey, we need to find this like Luke dude. And so they're giving attachments in movies and such that Luke would likely to open, right? Because he's trying to become the Jedi, right? Anyway, so the whole goal here is, hey, their goal is to get on his box and pull a selfie.jpg, which has location data in the XF metadata, so that they can find Luke, right? Because that's the whole thing of Does anybody remember that? Finding Luke? Not the movie that came out last year, but do you remember the movie where the big thing was to find where Luke was? You only have 3 choices. I'm not including the prequels in most cases. Do you know how hard it is to come up with Star Wars analogies to thread intel stuff? You really got to pull it. Anyway, so this is like Empire Strike Backs. There's this drone that Vader sends out to all over the galaxy, and the goal is to find Luke Skywalker. So the drone is the Viper, you know, and then there's stuff that Luke would lightly click on, and then down to the selfie. So the third part of this is really trying to pull all these things together and being like, all right, well, we're going to define the TTPs of our adversary, and we don't know who they are, right? But we're going to call them dark side, right? And so, you know, we can tell, all right, well, you know, their TTPs, they always use these Viper things. You know, so maybe we can set up some IDS systems to detect whenever Vipers are sensed. You know, they're always doing things by video for some reason. You know, they got those weird hologram things. So, and they're always doing like some, like they've done their research, whoever they're targeting, they went out and they found out, oh, well, this person knows that person. And then, so they spoofed the email and they said, you know, well, we're going to attach something to it that the target would likely click on. So, you know, basically all from their Viper stuff. They use this blue shadow, or this C2, and basically the C2 and any exfil is always to like a certain C range, or you know, 1.2.3. something. You know, they use 443. Maybe they use like FTP here, I'm not sure. And they're always trying to like, you know, their basic goal is exfil here. And so we essentially have this whole blueprint and kind of writing this up in maybe like a story format. Well, the dark side adversary, and then you could write like a 10-page white paper, and a vendor could give it out and for advertisement purposes. So the next thing that I want to talk about, so my original presentation like ended at step 6, and in a small event that I was talking to a guy about this, and his concern was, you know, from a management, like how can I convince management or how can I show management that their investment in the team to do this is worth it? So that got me thinking, you know, like how could we do this? And so this first slide here is more of a kind of a questionnaire philosophy. So you get like an external evaluator to come in, and they have questions that they ask you, and they fill out stuff, and then they try to rank you sort of on a maturity model. You know, whether you're partial, reactive, proactive, adaptive, or, you know, this particular model here. So that's one way. So as long as your maturity continues to go up, you know, you're showing progress there. I'm more of a data, like I think executives really like data though too. So if you can give them data, that's great. So there's Ryan Stillion's. I don't think it's been used, but I think it's a pretty cool model. It's the detection maturity level. So basically looking at all the tools that you have and figuring out, well, can I detect or stop atomic indicators, host or network, artifacts, tools, and it basically goes all the way up to your goals, which is essentially the same thing as the action on objectives that I talked about previously. Another way to look at it is you have whatever your super duper kill chain is, and maybe initially you're detecting them, like your goal is to stop them sooner in whatever chain you're using. So initially maybe you're stopping them here, right? But over, like you could do like a moving average and maybe in over time show like, oh, well, we're slowly, you know, last year we were stopping them here. This year on average we're stopping them here. So you're showing improvement that way. And then the third part, this is like a guy, like I explained all these ideas to him, and he's like, he didn't like them. And so we were brainstorming, and so his idea was to, you know, any signatures that are created, that are based on the threat that the threat intel team created based on the data or the information and the indicators that they found, mark the message that your IDS or your IPS, in the alert message say this is from the threat intel team, and and maybe have like a reference to like a particular adversary or a campaign or whatever. And so in the long run, you could basically kind of just do a query of this backend database and really get a good feel for, all right, well, the data that we've produced this much threat intel data, and that's been able to detect and or stop these, 100 adversaries or 100 attacks that we wouldn't have been able to detect had we not had the threat intelligence team. So just some final recommendations here is to, I'll just press this point again, you have to do threat intelligence internally. Based on the Evernote stuff, you really, you can definitely do it, although most of your stuff is pretty sensitive and you're not going to want to do that. So there are like Evernote clones and stuff like that you can put out there. So host your own, and then the second part is, don't redo work that others are already doing for you. Years ago, like it made total sense for me to get all these feeds and write scripts and such to suck them into one place so that I can do search and correlation. Right, well, there's other tools, there's like ThreatCrowd and I don't know, there's like tons of tools out there, tons of websites that are out there where you can go out and you can put in an IP, domain, or whatever, and it allows you to pivot around and learn the entire history about that particular indicator. And then that really lightens the load for your requirements for your internal system. And then, oh my God, I misspelled that, all right. I did that on purpose. You take, and this is about things, like if you take from the community, like all the open source resources, or if you're part of an Intel threat sharing team, give back. Like, don't just be somebody that sucks from it, because you're not really helping this situation. So the conclusion here is, first, get the basics done. Next, build your own TI capability internally. And then lastly, supplement with the external data. And so that's the entire presentation. I do just, before I take any questions or whatever, like I do just want to say thanks to BruCON for having me. It was awesome for them to invite me out again this year. And I want to thank all the coordinators and the volunteers for donating their time to make this conference just an awesome con. This is like, I come here and this is just, everybody that I meet here, just, you're all like, love this place. This is, everybody's super friendly here. I always have a great time. And then just basically thanks for running a great conference. All right, well, thanks a lot.